He was extremely susceptible and quick-witted. He was the loveliest, funniest guy I had ever met, in my opinion. Applause. Sharon Osbourne stood with the Prince of Darkness for decades. However, something very intimate was taking place behind the heavy metal legacy and gothic pandemonium. At 72, Sharon has finally spoken publicly about Ozzy's last days, sharing unexpected insights. Either things started off well or they started off poorly. It was difficult. Ozzy had 2 kids and was married. He was divorced by his wife, but she did so because of you. No, due to the beverage. She was at her breaking point. How did control, betrayal, and love contribute to his demise? We'll tell the secret tale of Ozzy's last chapter in this video. Who made the choices, how he passed away, and the familial unit that kept everything together. The one woman who knew Ozzy the best will curate a hauntingly poetic farewell, complete with painful truths and legal twists. A scheme hidden, a death predicted. The death of Ozzy Osbourne was not unexpected. Not for Sharon Osbourne, and definitely not for his family. Those closest to him had been getting ready for months, even if the world was shocked by the official announcement on July 22. The one person who had planned every significant period of his life, Sharon, had constructed a hidden, well-thought-out structure layer by layer, behind the wall of rock iconography and public quiet. Furthermore, it wasn't a system based on terror. Control was the foundation of it. Respiratory failure brought on by late-stage Parkinson's disease complications was the ultimate cause of death. Internally, however, even that diagnosis had been handled. Ozzy's Parkinsonian tremors, which were first made public in the late 2010s, had been deteriorating for years. By 2025, the illness had advanced to the point that motor function was all but gone. Speech was lost, and the requirement for 24-hour medical care was unavoidable. In response, Sharon built what can only be called a private medical stronghold. In their Buckinghamshire home, a comprehensive care model that was protected by law was in place. Everything was done flawlessly. Sharon coordinated Ozzy's medical transition with 3 different medical teams, months before he passed away. One for palliative care, one for motor rehabilitation, and one for neurological support. These consultants weren't part-time. These were seasoned professionals, many of whom were employed as full-time, high-level private specialists, and were required to sign strict secrecy agreements. Their documentation, which was confirmed by legal counsel, outlines an operating plan that resembles one that would be implemented in a hospital critical care unit inpatient setting. But the full regimen was followed at home. Early in July, family meetings started. The family didn't have any rumors or leaks, and they definitely didn't worry too quickly. This was intentional, carrying out a predetermined and authorized plan. Sharon's only concern was keeping Ozzy out of the spotlight, in case he passed away, and respecting his desire for total seclusion. The media was excluded. 72 hours prior to the official declaration, Sharon denied all press requests and prohibited even her longest friends and partners from speaking to the media. Everything was managed by the lawyers. Until Sharon gave her okay, nothing left the family. He passed away peacefully at home with his family. However, this beautiful description of a departure, already tinged with an initial shock, failed to convey the enormity of the machine operating silently in the background. Their home was converted by Sharon into a fully operational hospice, complete with digital health monitoring, estate readiness infrastructure, funeral planning, coordination, etc. Even the location of his last resting place, a private family burial spot, was planned and obtained a long time ago, without the public or media ever knowing, according to the family's court documents. But Jack Osbourne's semi-public remark contained the most personal information. Ozzy, unable to speak, made a final video conversation with his kids, 3 days prior to his passing, saying goodbye using facial expressions and eye contact. Though not spectacular, it was well considered. He was aware. Only Sharon was asked to remain with him in his last hours. But all 3 kids were present for that final connection. In a private note that was included with the press release, Sharon said, there was no mechanical intervention. No transfer took place. Nothing was done that wasn't requested by Ozzy. From a medical perspective, it seems straightforward. However, that statement had a significant emotional and legal component. It verified that the choices taken in his last days were not based on last-minute calls or medical emergencies. They were deliberate actions. Ozzy did not die suddenly. It was not disorderly. He was the one who planned, chose, and stole. On his own terms, he departed from this planet. It was only Sharon Osbourne who had a plan to make that choice a reality. However, one last statement from Ozzy would change the course of his so-called Mopefest burial. while the public grieved. Ozzy's parting request: biting off batads, shouting into stadiums ablaze, and pushing boundaries no other rock frontman dared to. Ozzy Osbourne was synonymous with anarchy for the majority of his existence. However, Ozzy's vision of death was surprisingly whimsical. He made it plain long before disease took over his body. He didn't want a tearful funeral. He was not interested in speeches or tragic symbolism. He desired trouble. He desired appreciation. Above all else, he wanted his farewell to feel alive. A fan asked Ozzy in a 2011 Times essay if it was morbid to organize one's own burial. The twist was that he wanted pranks. He responded, "Vintage Ozzy. I honestly don't care what they play at my funeral. They can put on a medley of Justin Bieber, Susan Boyle, and We Are the Diddy Men, if it makes them happy." He wanted laughter because, in his own words, there would be no harping on the bad times. Perhaps a knock from inside the coffin. Perhaps a video of him asking his doctor for a second opinion on the death diagnosis. An excerpt from the book that reflects the author's thoughts on Ozzy's philosophy of life. When asked how he would like to be remembered, Ozzy always came back to the same thing: that he survived to live a life that was filled with addiction, insanity, arrests, betrayals, fame, and a slow-burning illness that took away his ability to move and speak. He survived to enjoy a life that was incredibly extravagant, and said, "Thank you for it." Sharon took Ozzy's wishes seriously. Instead of holding a televised tribute or a large memorial at the right time, or having press photographers blow the trumpet at the gates, or have famous people with sunglasses give eulogies, she planned a private service that honored all of Ozzy's last wishes, a farewell rather than a funeral. According to family sources, only immediate family members and a small group of long-term care staff attended the ceremony, which was held at the Osbourne family's private burial ground, a location that Ozzy had himself selected many years prior, stating, "It is the only place I want to be." The service was not broadcast or recorded, and it was not open to the public. Although Sharon planned a private funeral service well in advance and had strict confidentiality agreements with no media allowed, the soundtrack was what really made the service Ozzy. Sharon chose every song that was played, but instead of his best-known hits or chart-topping songs, she chose unreleased recordings that Ozzy had been working on during his protracted recuperation from the 2019 accident that first revealed the slow progression of his Parkinson's disease. The final song played at the funeral was a reimagined version of "See You on the Other Side," an emotional remix that Ozzy requested in 2023. It was his way of saying goodbye, not through the spectacle but through sound, whispered instead of screamed. The songs were unheard before, stripped-down recordings, raw, experimental, and only for private moments. And as fans around the world lamented the Prince of Darkness's death, Sharon had kept her final vow. She never turned the day of his farewell into a museum exhibit. Instead, it was a carefully planned celebration of personal significance, with no public display at all. And it was completely unfiltered for Ozzy in death, just as he had aimed to be in life. A long whispered pact, and Sharon's controversial beliefs about death created a chilling shadow over Ozzy's happy farewell. But amid the ceremony's exact timing and private nature, whispers among the press and fans cast a shadow of uncertainty. Did that look less like a natural passing? Were there quiet hands helping Ozzy's farewell as all the gossip had it? The death pact rumor that Won't Die started in 2007, when Sharon Osbourne talked candidly about assisted talking in her own life in interviews, and in her memoir Survivor, My Story, The Next Chapter. She described how she and Ozzy had had difficult but open discussions about end-of-life options after witnessing her father's Alzheimer's disease. "If Ozzy or I ever got Alzheimer's," she stated at the time, "that's it." She specifically disclosed that they had decided to seek assistance from Dignitas, a Swiss organization that advocates assisted death under certain medical conditions. "We'd be off." The comment garnered media attention. Some took it literally, while others saw it as a hypothetical situation. Ozzy himself did not confirm or deny the details at the time, but he frequently echoed a similar tone in interviews: witty, macabre, and laced with self-awareness. But the rumors gained even more weight after he was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2019. Fast forward to July 2025, when Ozzy vanishes and passes away at home in a funeral that is meticulously planned, with him fully lucid but unable to communicate with his loved ones. There were no emergency transfers, hospital interventions, or publicly available medical records. Everything was handled under the legally binding advanced care plan that Ozzy and Sharon had signed. The old rumors were soon resurrected, this time with a vindictive twist, when the Osbournes brought up the subject again in October 2023. And the media dug up the '07 quotes along with the most recent audio from their podcast. "Do you think we're going to suffer?" Jack asked his mother in that program, if the plan to fly to Switzerland was still in place. Sharon didn't back down. Jack laughed uncomfortably and said, "Well, maybe. Life already suffers, doesn't it? Mental suffering is enough pain without physical pain," Sharon said bluntly. Fans have speculated that Ozzy did not meet entirely natural ends at the end. Did the family carry it out? Was the end medically assisted, discreetly executed under UK laws, or even abroad? So, if you've got mental and physical, see ya. This seemed to be wrapped in a lot of dark humor, but it still had the implication deep underneath it. Kelly Osbourne quickly put an end to the rumors. "My mom said to get attention one time, insisting that her father was not dying at that time, and that alleged pact had no legal reality," she wrote on Instagram, 11 days before Ozzy's death, criticizing the viral narratives. However, her message increased the fog even more in the days that followed. Hardly true. So, why the secrecy? Such complete authority? Why consider closing all press access? But service is something that cannot be denied. Legally and legitimately, Sharon Osbourne had complete power. She was in charge of all treatments, had power of attorney, and oversaw the entire end-of-life plan. The family did neither confirm or deny if that involved formal assisted death procedures. The case intensifies the debate over whether the alleged contract was genuine, inflated, or misinterpreted. The focus has now shifted to the narrative surrounding Ozzy's demise. Actually, the man who built a living by moping in the dark is synonymous with the final mystery. Grief was not the source of Sharon's capacity to handle Ozzy's final chapter. It was the outcome of a power structure she gradually constructed behind the scenes over several decades. The control system of Sharon. By the time Ozzy Osbourne reached his last years, the disorder that characterized him had given way to a calm and well-thought-out order. However, neither chance nor capitulation led to that order. The source was Sharon Osbourne. She was more than just his spouse. She was more than simply his supervisor. She created a comprehensive system that kept an eye on, safeguarded, and eventually saved everything from his inheritance to his health. It appeared to be devotion from the outside. With Sharon as its master operator, it resembled a fortress from the inside. This system was not developed during a crisis. Over decades it changed, from his solo career after Black Sabbath to his comeback as a TV personality. However, her position changed from coordinator to controller, as his health started to decline. After Parkinson's disease was officially diagnosed in 2019, and indications of central nervous system decline emerged in the 2010s, Sharon started implementing a completely new operational model that mirrored the setup of a high-security organization, greater than the household of a famous person. The medical procedures followed. A tripartite care organization was formed within the main home, including a neurological support team, a motor rehabilitation team, and a symptomatic treatment team. Every one of these units operated on a rotating shift schedule. They were not acquired via any national health system. Sharon solely looked to private sources for competent suppliers, avoiding any public channels. Meals, sleep, and physical activity were all recorded using coded systems due to the extreme control. Written logs were transformed on encrypted systems at the end of each shift, and a personal advisory board checked them once a week for quality assurance. All public appearances would cease, unless Sharon herself gave her permission. They would only be approved even when Ozzy made infrequent public appearances, if they were able to sit motionless, speak steadily, and exhibit little facial control. These were not petty requests. All of these measures were taken to protect the family's highly guarded public image and dignity. Media presence that has been announced in advance, event spaces that have been medically prepared, and caregivers who are always accessible. At health, Sharon's tight grasp persisted. She had strict control over finances, media rights, and even social engagement. From a minimum of 3 legal businesses, including a personal branding business, a touring company, and a music licensing agency, he was in charge of every source of revenue. Every year, budget models were modified in accordance with anticipated medical conditions and treatment expenditures. She was typically listed as a co-owner or legal representative in contracts. Without that person's signature, nothing involving the convenience of Ozzy's name took place. Legal insulation too. Early in her deterioration, Sharon obtains an advanced power of attorney, which gives her complete autonomy over her medical decisions, even in defiance of group consensus. She is the last authority, and just next of kin. This arrangement makes sure that the media, medical boards, and even relatives don't get involved. She is authorized to act on Ozzy's behalf, and has access and supervision. Under this arrangement, the kids also played various roles. Kelly Osbourne oversaw the family's and social media communications. Jack talked about protecting digital assets and the law. Always more reserved, Amy will only arrive when summoned. That's such an emotional split, isn't it? Does it work? Everybody is given a role that is part of a plan. Sharon has accomplished something that very few people could. Like a clock, the legacy of the man who was known for total mayhem ticks away. There was no leak. There were no busts. There were no public unravelings, no scandals, and no invasive paparazzi photos. The stronghold held, and in the end, this gave Ozzy most of what he desired: control, privacy, and tranquility. However, complete control was insufficient to protect their relationship from the greatest test of all, betrayal and impending collapse. The affair that almost brought everything to an end. Sharon Osbourne had to mend something far more delicate: their marriage, before she could construct the stronghold that shielded Ozzy in his last years. For a couple whose lives had withstood the strain of public scrutiny, addiction, and celebrity, they almost fell apart because of something other than Ozzy's condition. It was adultery. And everything, both personal and professional, nearly fell apart in a few days after the affair was made public. The story was first reported by the media in 2016. Ozzy Osbourne and a hairstylist had a relationship outside of marriage. Sharon was caught off guard after decades of overseeing Ozzy's profession and his volatile behavior. She almost instantly distanced herself from him after officially confirming the affair. She wasn't standing up for Ozzy for the first time in their marriage. She was requesting space. She canceled all of his appearances, took away his scheduled performances, and declared their marriage to be terminated at that precise moment. On the inside, though, there were many more issues. Although many believed this phrase was a highly hygienic assessment of something far deeper entrenched in control and impulse. Ozzy had voluntary treatment for what were thought to be obsessive sexual impulses. Following Sharon's example, a comprehensive evaluation procedure that included both medical and legal aspects was initiated. The family's correspondence and documentary records demonstrated that this time frame involved a thorough reassessment of the relationship's rules of participation. The results were never observed before. Similar to contracts, new legal documents were created. Ozzy had to submit to financial inspection from third parties, maintain boundaries when it came to truly personal connections outside of his marriage, and avoid making unapproved public appearances. These were not merely contract-like borders with monitors, penalties, and terms of reference. Sharon was making it clear whether or not the marriage proceeded according to her wishes. Now, structure would take the place of spontaneity. In a more practical than an emotional sense, the children were instrumental in the reunion. In order to balance their father's visits with appointments, family responsibilities, and media filtering, Jack and Kelly Osbourne devised a sort of or plan. Jack was in charge of all legal interfaces and privacy protocol. Kelly took charge of family communications on social media because she had a lot of expertise and had survived several public narratives. Amy only took part when it required private planning, maintaining her position as a mute but resolute spectator. The goal was not to change the traditional definition of marriage. This union was not characterized by extravagant displays of affection or televised reconciliations. As she put it herself, according to Sharon, the procedure involved restoring structure. The marriage was restructured but not healed. Every step of the relational healing process was reviewed, signed, and recorded. Together, life became more accurate than passion. Following the signing of the full internal agreement, Sharon assumed leadership of Ozzy's career once more. Since then, Sharon has been able to manage finances, coordinate medical care, and veto media appearances. Even her own words would become less important. She cancels the event appearance, withdraws from public-facing activity, and devotes herself fully to re-establishing the structure that had made them one of rock's most formidable and unpredictable teams. This isn't even recovery, it has been reset. A more diverse kind of allegiance has taken the place of trust. Sharon did not understand forgiveness. Instead, control was being used. Additionally, Ozzy had to adapt due to the symptoms of his degenerative illness that were starting to manifest. For serenity, he gave up his chaos. The man who had been governed by irrational desires suddenly followed the strictest schedule he had ever known in his life. Such an extensive, intensely personal change has far-reaching consequences. For the years before his death, it gave Sharon complete power over his reputation, wealth, and health. That castle would not have been able to survive without this collapse, and the grueling reconstruction that followed. None of that structure was more important than the stillness they shared in Ozzy's last hours. The last hours, when his voice was gone and only his eyes were left. The conclusion was not unexpected by the time July 2020 rolled around, yet it still came as a shock. For weeks, Ozzy Osbourne had been gradually deteriorating. He had become less mobile. He stopped talking. Even his once mischievous and wild-eyed defiant facial musculature were diminished to mere twitches. One thing, however, was still intact: his consciousness. Ozzy's family claims that he was completely cognizant in his last hours, which alone gave his farewell a significance that no performance could ever match. A final video call was set up in the 3 days before his death. It was not an impromptu moment. It was planned, approved by doctors, and made safe. Jack, Amy, and Kelly, his kids, were on the screen. Ozzy was speechless. Parkinson's disease had taken over his speech, yet he managed to express what needed to be communicated with little eye movements, modest facial changes, and sustained concentration. There was nothing ambiguous about the moment. Everyone understood the meaning of the farewell, Jack Osbourne subsequently affirmed. In the final moments, Ozzy chose clarity, stillness, and most importantly, presence. A man who had spent the majority of his life howling into microphones, standing motionless, and concentrating on eye contact. But there was power in that silence. Ozzy had fought substance abuse, chaos, controversy, and inner demons for several decades. Sharon Osbourne was the only one granted access to her husband during his final hours. It was a planned choice that remained confidential until after his passing. No clergy has a doctor or other outside visitors, so Sharon entered the room to be with him not as an executive or manager of his estate, but as the one person he ultimately wished to remain faithful and loyal to. Ozzy died peacefully and with someone he trusted, without any machines, tubes, or hospital monitors. According to the family's official statement, Sharon said in the letter released following the funeral last Wednesday, "He and I kept our old promises. There was no mechanical intervention. No transfer took place." Those lines were not only poetic but also legally significant, confirming that Ozzy's death was entirely dependent on an advanced medical directive, and that all decisions, from physical setting to pain management, had been planned while Ozzy was still able to sign documents. A funeral team was hired years ago, and they were subject to strict operating procedures and confidentiality agreements. No photos leaked, and there were no paparazzi at the gate. Sharon made the ending seamless. The body was left in the private room for the prescribed 12 hours, before being taken to a pre-arranged burial location. An ambient-sounding playlist was playing in the background, very low, and the room where Ozzy died was, in the words of one caregiver who worked under Sharon's employment contract, simple, cool, and quiet. Not even longtime industry friends were informed of the timing. Sharon built the wall around him, protected him from the noise, and fulfilled every last wish in precisely the right order. Many of those songs were unreleased recordings of Ozzy during the lockdown, songs he never shared with the outside world, songs meant for just such private moments. They weren't the end of a rock legend, the closing of a chapter in a very human life that had been stripped down to its essence. Theatrics did not accompany Ozzy's final departure, but one final layer of Sharon's control safeguarded the legacy he left behind. Ozzy Osbourne's death may have signaled the end of a life, but it also marked the start of something much more intricate: the management of a legacy. His last gift to her was not money or music, but authority, complete, undisputed authority over everything he left behind. Even before Ozzy's death, Sharon had been the undisputed controller of his professional life, and in typical Osbourne fashion, it wasn't left to fate, infighting, or entertainment executives. Instead, it was locked down, prepped, protected, and placed directly into Sharon Osbourne's hands. She had handled every album, licensing deal, and brand appearance. But what she did after his passing went beyond business. It was strategic preservation. The Osbourne family did not release a public list of heirs, hold a press conference regarding his artistic archive, or make an announcement regarding the future of his name. Instead, they issued a succinct but extremely organized legal breakdown that made one thing very clear. First, the will. Legal representatives and confirmed documents state that Ozzy's estate had already been converted into a closed family management system prior to his passing. Based on external negotiations and contested claims, Sharon had full administrative authority, rather than equal inheritance to heirs. This legacy would remain internal and intact. However, Ozzy's legacy was arranged according to role, function, and not favor. Kelly Osbourne was given all rights to media consultation and public messaging because of her experience in media relations. And Jack Osbourne, who had years of experience in production and digital logistics, was in charge of digital assets like archival recordings, unreleased concert footage, and protected intellectual property. The family's non-commercial music library, demos, handwritten lyrics, and unreleased personal recordings that Ozzy made for himself were all accessible to Amy, the most private of the siblings. But Sharon owns the catalog, the centerpiece, all licensing rights, imaging, and branding controls. No tribute tours, documentaries, or merchandising deals were allowed without her consent, and she was given the authority to approve or deny anyone access to Ozzy's name, image, music, or likeness. She used this power right away, rejecting any proposals from people interested in plans for a renowned project, like establishing a foundation in his honor or organizing a memorial concert. This wasn't just about maintaining control, it was about protecting purity. And Sharon didn't want Ozzy's life to be a brand that was taken over by someone else. She stated in a written postscript to the family's legal filing that no outside organizations would be allowed to profit from or repackage Ozzy's legacy. Any awards would be symbolic rather than commercial. Step out was perhaps the most important aspect of this final arrangement. After years of running the Osbourne empire, she formally resigned as manager of the brand. His image deserved something better than a licensing template. Sharon preserved the essence of a man who lived, fell, got back up, and got on his own terms. There was no fanfare, just finality. To those closest to her, it was a quiet but significant change. There were no media tours, books, or behind-the-scenes specials. Her task on the legal documents was completed with a single signature, acknowledging that all duties pertaining to Ozzy's assets, medical affairs, and posthumous directives had been handled. The end of an era. After decades of managing every detail, she decided to choose silence over spectacle and peace over control. If you thought this story was powerful, please hit the like button, share it with someone who remembers the Prince of Darkness, and leave a comment below. Sometimes the quietest ways are the best ways to end a life. Sharon Osbourne just ensured that his last performance was just what he had envisioned.